Jason Miller had always prided himself on his success. A tech entrepreneur in his mid-30s, he had built an empire from the ground up. His life was everything people aspired to: luxury cars, a beautiful home, and a beautiful wife, Samantha. To anyone who knew them, they were the perfect couple. Jason's world was one of constant meetings, high-stakes negotiations, and late nights spent perfecting his projects. Meanwhile, Samantha, 32, ran a successful PR agency, charming everyone she met with her elegance and beauty. Their lives seemed like a dream. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Jason had always been consumed by his work, never truly noticing that his wife's eyes had started to wander. Samantha, despite her outward success, felt neglected. The glitz and glam of their life only hid the growing loneliness she felt. She had married Jason because of his drive and ambition, but over time it became clear to her that his ambitions didn't include her. She was a wife, a partner in name, but emotionally she was drifting. She found herself yearning for something more: attention, excitement, and intimacy. And one day she found it in the form of Luke Donovan, a charming, wealthy real estate agent who came into her life in a way she hadn't expected. He was everything Jason wasn't: carefree, spontaneous, and full of energy. In a world where she felt invisible to her own husband, Luke made her feel seen again. Jason, though, never saw it coming. He was so absorbed in his work, in the hustle of his career, that he didn't notice the subtle changes in Samantha. The way she started spending more time away from home. The late-night work meetings that seemed to stretch longer and longer. The tension between them at the dinner table, the awkward silences that lingered where once there had been easy conversation. Jason, caught up in his own bubble of success, missed every warning sign. He had no idea that the woman he loved, the woman who had stood by him for years, was slowly slipping away. But then came the day when everything shattered, when Jason found the first clue. The discovery that would change his life forever. Jason's heart raced as he stared down at the phone on the kitchen counter. It wasn't his habit to snoop, but the strange feeling in the pit of his stomach that day pushed him to do something he would later regret. He had just returned home from a long day of meetings, expecting to find Samantha relaxing in their cozy living room, as she often did after work. But she was nowhere to be found. Her phone, however, was sitting right there on the counter, unlocked, face up. Jason's eyes flickered to the screen. The message notification was from a contact he didn't recognize: Luke Donovan. His heart skipped a beat. Luke was the man who had been spending more time with Samantha recently. At first, Jason had brushed it off as just a friendly colleague. Samantha often worked with influential people, and she had spoken highly of him. But something about this text, the one that read, "Can't wait to see you again tonight, last night was incredible," made the hair on the back of Jason's neck stand up. His grip on the phone tightened. With trembling hands, Jason opened the message thread. The words stung like a slap to the face: playful banter, intimate exchanges, pictures and comments that were too personal, too intimate for two people who were supposedly just friends. The betrayal was clear. His wife, the woman he had trusted with everything, his love, his future, had been seeing another man. The shock hit him like a tidal wave, knocking the breath out of his lungs. The more he scrolled, the more disgusted he became. These weren't just casual flirtations. These were secret rendezvous, stolen moments that he had never suspected. The messages were filled with longing and affection, everything Jason had been craving from Samantha. His stomach twisted as he realized just how much of his marriage had been a lie. The woman he had built his life with had been with another man. In that instant, something inside him snapped. The hurt and betrayal were overwhelming, but as the anger started to bubble up, a plan began to form in his mind. He wouldn't just let this go. He wouldn't confront her immediately or beg for answers. No, Jason was smarter than that. He wasn't going to allow himself to be the victim. He would make sure that this pain, this betrayal, didn't go unpunished. And so the wheels of his revenge began to turn. The question wasn't whether or not he would get back at Samantha, it was how. And as the anger simmered within him, Jason realized that revenge wasn't just about confronting the man who had taken his wife. It was about hitting Luke where it hurt the most: his family. Stay tuned. Because what Jason planned next would leave everyone in his life, his wife, her lover, and even the lover's family, reeling from the unexpected consequences of his revenge. For days after discovering Samantha's affair, Jason was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. His mind felt like a battlefield, with rage, sadness, and confusion constantly clashing. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the reality of his marriage, a reality he hadn't wanted to see. The woman he loved, the woman he had devoted his life to, had betrayed him. The anger was a constant, gnawing presence, and he could feel it seeping into every aspect of his life. It wasn't just the affair that stung, it was the realization that he had been blind to it all. How had he missed the signs? The late nights, the subtle distance between them, her emotional detachment. The fact that he had been so caught up in his work that he didn't even notice his own wife slipping away hurt him more than the affair itself. Jason couldn't understand how this had happened. He had provided her with everything: success, luxury, security, but somewhere along the way, he had neglected her emotional needs. He had taken for granted that she would always be there, that their bond was unbreakable. But it wasn't, and now he was left picking up the shattered pieces of a relationship that had seemed perfect. The anger festered, but so did the guilt. Was he to blame for not being more present? Was his work the reason she had turned to someone else? But guilt only served to fuel the fire of his desire for revenge. Jason couldn't just let this slide. He was no fool. He wasn't going to waste time confronting Samantha about her infidelity, begging for answers, or wallowing in self-pity. No, he wanted something more, a deeper form of payback that would make her and Luke feel the same gut-wrenching pain he was experiencing. And that's when he came up with the idea. Instead of confronting the situation head-on, Jason would take a more methodical approach. He would make Luke regret ever stepping into his life. But revenge wasn't just about going after Luke. No, there was something deeper. Jason knew that in order to really get under Luke's skin, he would need to hit him where it would hurt the most: his family. Luke was close to his mother, Eva, and his younger sister, Rachel. If Jason could manipulate the situation, get under their skin, and exploit their connections to Luke, he would be able to destroy everything Luke had built. This wasn't just about sex or emotional destruction. It was about control, taking back the power that had been stolen from him. As the plan formed, Jason began to feel a sense of clarity that he hadn't felt in days. He was no longer just the betrayed husband. He was the master of the game, and the pieces were about to fall into place. Luke Donovan, the man who had so easily stolen Samantha's heart, wasn't just a random affair. No, Luke was far more than that. Jason had heard his name tossed around in various business circles, but he had never really paid attention. Now, though, Luke had become the center of Jason's fury. And as Jason dug deeper into his life, he began to uncover a wealth of information that would serve as the foundation for his revenge. Luke was everything Jason wasn't. He was effortlessly charming, confident, and used to getting whatever he wanted. He had inherited his wealth from a series of successful real estate ventures, and his name was well known in both the business and social circles. But it wasn't just his money and influence that made him dangerous, it was his charisma. Luke had a way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the room. It was no wonder that Samantha had been drawn to him. But as Jason continued his investigation into Luke's background, he began to see the cracks in the seemingly perfect facade. Luke had grown up in a family that appeared to be loving and close-knit, but Jason quickly realized that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Luke's family, particularly his mother, Eva, was a controlling presence in his life. She had been the one who pushed him to succeed, to climb higher in the business world, and her influence on him was undeniable. And then there was Rachel, Luke's younger sister, who had always been protective of him. The bond between them was unbreakable, at least. Jason thought it was. Jason's mind began to race. If he could get close to Eva and Rachel, if he could manipulate the situation just right, he could use them to destroy Luke. The more he learned, the more he realized that Luke's family was his greatest weakness. Jason wasn't just going to expose Luke's affair with Samantha. He was going to dismantle everything Luke cared about, one piece at a time. the Donovan family would become the target of his calculated revenge. He wouldn't just take down the man who had stolen his wife, he would take down the entire foundation that had allowed him to thrive. Jason was no fool. He knew that to truly get to Luke, he couldn't just confront him or his lover. That would be too simple, too predictable. Jason needed to go deeper, to hit where it hurt the most. And as the days passed, his plan took shape. The first step was to get close to Luke's family, his mother, Eva, and his younger sister, Rachel. It started with Eva. Jason had seen her at a charity event, a gala where high society mingled with the elite. He knew it would be the perfect opportunity to strike up a conversation. Eva, at 50 years old, was still a stunning woman, elegant and poised. She held herself with a quiet confidence, and Jason immediately saw the attraction. The chemistry between them was undeniable. Eva was used to men admiring her, but Jason wasn't just another admirer. He was a man with a plan, and the moment they spoke, Jason knew he had her attention. At first, their conversations were harmless, innocent pleasantries about the event and mutual acquaintances. But Jason wasn't interested in small talk. He subtly began to inject personal anecdotes, creating a deeper connection. His charm was disarming, and Eva couldn't help but be drawn to him. It didn't take long before their conversations became more intimate. Jason began to see how lonely Eva truly was. She had spent so much of her life pushing Luke to succeed that she had neglected her own emotional needs. And here was Jason, offering her attention, offering her something she hadn't felt in years: desire. Before long, they were meeting privately, away from the prying eyes of the public. Jason played the role of the attentive lover, and Eva, caught up in the excitement of the affair, never suspected his true intentions. She thought she was in control, but Jason was manipulating the situation from the start. His every move, every word was carefully calculated to keep her on the hook. And as their affair grew, so did Jason's sense of power. He was getting closer to Luke through his mother, and the closer he got, the more confident he became that this was just the beginning. After establishing a connection with Eva, Jason knew he needed to move on to Luke's younger sister, Rachel. In his mind, she was the next piece of the puzzle, and to truly bring down Luke, he needed to get into Rachel's world. He had learned enough about her. She was fiercely protective of her brother, but there were cracks in her armor that Jason intended to exploit. Rachel, at 27, was an attractive, fiery woman with a personality to match. Unlike her calm and composed mother, Rachel was outspoken, passionate, and unafraid to voice her opinions. She was deeply loyal to Luke, often acting as his emotional anchor when he was in trouble. To Jason, that loyalty was a vulnerability. He would use it to his advantage. It all started innocently enough, just like his initial interactions with Eva. Jason made sure to bump into Rachel at a charity event, a networking dinner where the Donovan family was well known. At first, their conversations were casual, lighthearted banter about work and life in general. But Jason could tell Rachel was drawn to him. His charm, his self-assured demeanor, made her feel like she was the only person in the room. She was used to being the one who looked out for others, but Jason's attention made her feel desired in a way she hadn't experienced before. As their interactions grew more frequent, Jason began subtly inserting himself into her life. He'd call her just to check in after a particularly stressful family event or after a public appearance where she'd seemed out of her element. His messages were thoughtful, yet casual enough not to raise suspicion. It wasn't long before they were texting each other regularly. What Rachel didn't know was that Jason wasn't just interested in being her friend, he was playing the long game. The more time they spent together, the more Rachel started to open up. She confided in him about her family dynamics, how she always felt like the lesser sibling compared to Luke's high expectations, and how she longed for her own space, away from the shadow of her successful brother. Jason played the perfect listener, validating her frustrations and desires. Over time, he began weaving small, calculated suggestions into their conversations. He'd talk about Luke's behavior, subtly planting seeds of doubt about his brother's intentions and commitment to family. Slowly, Jason cultivated an image of Luke as someone who had always been a bit self-centered and emotionally distant. Rachel, whose loyalty to Luke had once been unshakable, started questioning her brother's character. The emotional connection between Jason and Rachel grew deeper with each passing day, and while Rachel never thought of Jason in a romantic light at first, she was beginning to find herself attracted to him not just physically, but emotionally. Jason could tell he had her exactly where he wanted her. One evening, after they had spent hours talking over dinner, Jason could sense the shift in Rachel's mood. He knew this was the moment. As they stood by the door to say goodbye, he moved closer, brushing a lock of her hair away from her face. Their eyes locked for a moment, the tension palpable. Rachel seemed to hesitate, caught between her loyalty to Luke and the undeniable chemistry between her and Jason. Without saying a word, he leaned in and kissed her slowly, carefully, giving her just enough time to pull away if she wanted to. But Rachel didn't pull away. The kiss deepened, and in that moment, everything changed. Rachel's hesitation melted away, replaced by a rush of emotion she hadn't expected. Jason had crossed the line, and now he was more deeply entangled with the Donovan family than ever. He had successfully manipulated both mother and daughter, and they were both now under his spell. Jason's revenge plan had reached its apex. He was no longer just playing a game of emotional manipulation, he had escalated it into something much darker, more calculated. After months of carefully orchestrated moves, he now had the perfect opportunity to strike, and he was about to take things to a level neither Eva nor Rachel could have ever imagined. It all came together one fateful weekend. Jason had been spending increasing amounts of time with both Eva and Rachel, and the lines between manipulation and genuine attraction had blurred. He had grown to enjoy the control he had over them. Each one of them was unknowingly tied into his web, and he was ready to pull the strings tighter. But now, he wanted to take his revenge to the next level. It started with an invitation to a private weekend getaway, an exclusive, secluded cabin in the mountains. Jason knew that both Eva and Rachel were more than willing to spend time with him away from the hustle and bustle of their everyday lives. He had carefully crafted an atmosphere of seduction, ensuring that he would be alone with them, away from the prying eyes of the world. The secluded location would allow him the privacy he needed to execute his final move. The weekend started innocently enough: wine, cozy fireside chats, and laughter as the three of them relaxed in the cabin. But Jason knew that it wouldn't stay innocent for long. By the second evening, after a few too many glasses of wine, the atmosphere in the cabin began to shift. Eva and Rachel, both undeniably attracted to Jason, were relaxed and more open than usual. He had planted enough seeds of desire and tension between them that now, all it would take was one final push to get them to cross the line. It started with Eva. She was the first to make the move. After a conversation about the nature of relationships and control, she leaned in and kissed Jason. Rachel, who had been sitting across the room, watched in silence as the kiss deepened. Eva pulled away, eyes locked on her daughter as she whispered something to her, something Jason couldn't quite hear. Rachel looked uncertain for a moment, but her desire was clear. She stood up, walked over to them, and kissed Jason as well. The room was heavy with tension, and Jason, always the one in control, knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for. He had them both in his grasp, mother and daughter, caught in a twisted dance of passion and revenge. The night unfolded in a haze of desire, manipulation, and power. Jason's plan was now complete. The affair with Samantha, the betrayal, the manipulation of Luke's family, it all came crashing together in this final, twisted act of revenge. Jason's actions would leave lasting scars on everyone involved. He had succeeded in breaking down the very foundation of Luke's life, using his mother and sister as pawns in a game of ultimate vengeance. But as the morning light filtered through the cabin windows, Jason realized something. The moment of triumph had come, but it didn't feel like victory. The emptiness that followed was suffocating. He had gotten everything he wanted, but at what cost? The thrill of revenge was fleeting, and Jason was left alone in the aftermath, wondering whether the pain and destruction had been worth it. The morning after the twisted encounter in the cabin, Jason woke up to the stark silence of the aftermath. The fog of alcohol and passion had lifted, and the reality of what he had done began to set in. He had successfully torn apart Luke's world, his relationship with Samantha, his connection with his mother, and his bond with his sister Rachel. Jason had orchestrated the perfect storm, and now he was left to witness the fallout. Eva and Rachel, both still tangled in the confusion and heat of the night before, avoided eye contact with him. Jason knew that, deep down, they were just as lost as he was. They had given in to the whirlwind of emotions, but now they were left with the consequences of their actions. Jason, though, felt an emptiness in his chest, one that was not filled by the triumph of revenge, but rather by an overwhelming sense of loneliness. He had broken something irreparable, but it hadn't brought him the satisfaction he thought it would. It wasn't long before Luke called. His voice, normally so self-assured, trembled with anger and confusion. "What the hell happened?" Luke demanded, his words sharp and accusing. Jason could hear the fury in his tone, but there was a tinge of hurt beneath it. Luke had figured out what had happened. He knew about the affair with Samantha and had pieced together the strange interactions with his mother and sister. But the truth was even more devastating than Luke could have imagined. Jason had not just slept with his lover's family, he had destroyed everything Luke had ever held dear. Jason could hear Luke trying to process the betrayal. He wasn't just angry, he was gutted. "You've ruined everything, man. My mother, my sister, what the hell is wrong with you?" Luke's voice was raw with emotion, but Jason didn't flinch. He had already made his peace with what he had done. In his mind, Luke deserved this. He had taken everything from Jason, and now Jason had returned the favor tenfold. The fallout wasn't just limited to Luke. Samantha, too, was spiraling. She had been confronted with the full extent of Jason's revenge. She couldn't fathom the depths to which he had gone, and the guilt she felt for her own actions hit her like a freight train. She reached out to Jason, but he refused to take her calls. He had already moved on from her. Her betrayal no longer mattered. What mattered now was the chaos he had unleashed on Luke and his family. As Jason looked around, surveying the wreckage of his own making, he realized that revenge had come at a steep price. He had destroyed relationships, shattered lives, and yet he felt no victory, only a hollow emptiness. The emotional high he had expected was fleeting, and now he was left to deal with the consequences of his actions. The world he had so carefully constructed, the life he had built, seemed fragile and empty in comparison to the damage he had caused. In the weeks that followed the chaotic weekend in the cabin, Jason's life began to spiral out of control. The fallout from his revenge was more severe than he had anticipated. His business dealings began to suffer as whispers about his personal life spread through the circles of power he had once dominated. Clients pulled back, partners hesitated, and investors started asking uncomfortable questions. The life he had spent years building now seemed to be on the brink of collapse. Samantha, devastated by her own actions, had tried to salvage something between them, but Jason was beyond reaching. He had gone too far, and she knew it. She was ashamed, torn between the love she had for him and the guilt she carried for betraying him with Luke. She had nothing left to offer, and their marriage was beyond repair. She left, moving out of their home with only a few belongings in tow, the weight of the affair and Jason's revenge hanging over them like a dark cloud. But Jason wasn't just losing his marriage, he was losing himself. The emptiness that had followed his revenge lingered, seeping into every part of his life. The powerful sense of satisfaction he had imagined was replaced by regret. He had destroyed more than just Luke's world, he had destroyed his own. What was once a man driven by ambition and success was now a man consumed by his own actions. The pain of revenge had given way to the reality that nothing could bring back the relationships he had torn apart. His bond with his wife, his once career-driven purpose, and even his ability to trust others had been shattered beyond repair. And in the quiet, sleepless nights, Jason began to realize something he hadn't wanted to admit: revenge had not been sweet. It had been his undoing. As time passed, Jason found himself living in the aftermath of his choices. The guilt and regret weighed on him heavily, and though he had once felt powerful in his pursuit of revenge, he now found himself facing the consequences with no way out. He had lost Samantha, and the connection he thought he would build with Luke's family had only added to the rubble of his own fractured life. His empire, once full of promise, now seemed hollow. Even his business was in jeopardy, and Jason realized that the cost of revenge had been far higher than anything he had ever imagined. One evening, after a long day of meetings and financial setbacks, Jason sat alone in his office, staring out at the city lights. The view was the same as it had been for years, yet now it felt foreign, distant, and unreachable. For the first time in a long time, Jason felt truly alone. The revenge that had once seemed like the ultimate victory now felt like a fleeting illusion. But in that solitude, something inside him began to change. Maybe it was the realization that there was no going back, or maybe it was the deep sense of regret that gnawed at him every waking moment. Either way, Jason knew he needed to find a new direction, a new purpose. Revenge had only given him temporary satisfaction, but it hadn't brought him peace. It hadn't made him whole. As he sat in the darkness, Jason understood that the road to redemption would not come from more vengeance, but from acceptance. The people he had hurt, Samantha, Luke, Eva, Rachel, would never truly forgive him. But that didn't mean he couldn't forgive himself. And in that moment of realization, he found the first step toward closure. "Thanks for watching," Jason whispered to himself, as though preparing to speak to an unseen audience. He turned off his desk lamp, stepping out of his office into the cool night air. Like, share, comment, and subscribe if you've been on this twisted journey with me. Maybe next time there's a story where things don't end in ruin. But for now, remember, revenge, it turns out, isn't always sweet.